welcome to Art with Anna. Today we are learning about an artist named Louise Bourgeois. She was an artist from Paris, France, but did move to the United States, I believe in the 30s or 40s, and did most of her artwork, if not all of it, in the United States, in New York City. She is a female artist. Sexism does also play a role in her life in that she was not recognized till her later years. She was born in 1911 and died in 2007. So she lived a full life. Before we get too far into learning about her, let's talk about what we'll need, and then we'll get started. We will need to plug in and start heating up a hot glue gun, red and white paper, red and white paint, cup for water, 2 pipe cleaners, leftover cardboard, scissors, sponge paintbrush, something to use as a palette. I'm just using a scrap piece of cardstock. Alright, while our hot glue guns are heating up a little bit, let's talk a little bit about our artist. So Louise Bourgeois, she did grow up in a family that was quite well off. Her parents were weavers, but also just restorers of tapestries. So that was their business. But Louise was, she had kind of a sad upbringing. She was really affected by the fact that her dad had an affair with their nanny. So this really affected her because she was close with her father, and this caused a lot of frustration, sadness, and anger in her life. And that really is what motivated her to be an artist and what motivated most of her art. So for most of her life, a lot of her art was pretty angry. The color red is in it a lot. There's a lot of images of like mothers and fathers that are kind of disturbing, and just you can tell in her artwork that she's sad and she's angry. In her later years, after her dad passed away, she shifted her focus onto her mother and did a lot of artwork kind of more focused on her. So she really used artwork as her therapy. I think it really helped her make her way through life and deal with what was going on inside of her. She was someone who studied mathematics at first but switched to art, so she was known to be very, very intellectual, but also she would be known to have these very emotional kind of fits where she'd throw things and yell and be upset. One of her most famous pieces of artwork are the spiders. So there's spiders all around the world, these giant sculptures of spiders. And this actually, although it looks scary, is something that represents her mother. And that is because spiders are weavers. They weave their webs. Her mother also was a weaver. She wove the tapestries that they sold as a business. And in all of these giant sculptures, there is an egg sac representing that the spider is a mother, that she has children. But also, these are giant sculptures that are intimidating. And she was thinking about her mother's strength in this, her strength to deal with the affairs, her strength to have a career as a weaver, her strength to be a mother, and how all of that can be kind of intimidating. Women can be intimidating by all the things that they go through and do. So these giant sculptures are some things that she's very, very famous for. But we're going to look at more two-dimensional artwork of hers today. So we're going to focus on more of her spirals work. And she talks about loving spirals because they are something that are controlled, right? They're a form. We know what a spiral is. You have to make a spiral shape for it to be a spiral. But she said it's also very free. You can kind of go on forever with it. So it's both something that's structured and free, and I think that's what she found art was in her life. So we're going to make some spirals today, and it's going to be pretty simple and pretty fun. So she's known for some of her printmaking and drawing and sculpture. She is pretty well versed in a lot of different art forms. But one was printmaking of block prints, actually, of some spirals. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna grab our cardboard, and I'm gonna cut some squares out of it, kind of like 4x4 size squares. I'll show you here. They do not have to be perfect. And you can make yours bigger if you wanted, or even smaller, but this is about the size that I am gonna make today. So I'm gonna do 2 of those. All right, so we have 2 pieces of our cardboard. We also have 2 pipe cleaners. So one pipe cleaner will go onto one of these squares and one will go onto the other. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is make a spiral out of our pipe cleaner. So I'm just gonna spin it around. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can even be kind of jagged. But we want to make sure it fits onto our square. And the simple next thing we're going to do is just to hot glue it on. So put some hot glue all around. Stick it on. Be careful not to burn yourself. Alright, so we have our first one done. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with our second one. Getting hot glue everywhere. Alright, let's make a spiral with this one. I have chosen 2 pipe cleaners that are kind of different sizes. The striped pipe cleaner is a little more fluffy than this one is. So I'm hoping they'll show kind of different shapes easier. A little more variation. Alright, so that is going to be my spiral on there. I'm going to glue this on. Once we've finished both of these spirals, the next thing we're going to do is just simply decide which one we want to do on which paper. So I think I'm going to do, my red paper is a little bit bigger than my white paper just by chance, so, and the spiral's bigger. So I think I'm going to put this one on here and this one on here. Now our goal is to do opposite paint color of paper color. So I'm going to do a white spiral on my red paper and a red spiral on my white paper. And we might switch later on, but that's what we're going to start with. So we'll need to get our paint onto our palette and put some paint onto our spirals. Alright, so essentially we're going to use our spirals as stamps. That's how we're going to use them today, which is similar to block printing. Typically block printing is carved wood, but we do have our own little blocks here. Alright, so I'm going to start with the white paint. And I'm going to sponge the paint onto my pipe cleaner. So once you've kind of covered your pipe cleaner in white paint, the next thing to do is simply to turn it over, press it down. There we go, we're left with a spiral right there, right on our red paper. Now let's do the same thing with this pipe cleaner, except for with red paint. All right, we've loaded it with some paint. Press it down. There we go, nice. Now, the nice thing about printing is that you can make many prints of the exact same thing. So that's what I'm gonna do next. I'm gonna do many spirals on here. I am thinking about maybe doing some red spirals on this red sheet of paper because I think I'll show up. I don't think white will show up on the white sheet of paper, so I don't think I'll work on that. But I might put some red paint on this bigger spiral. So I'll just kind of play around with putting red and white paints on the different spirals and printing them all over these sheets of paper. So as I mentioned, Louise Bourgeois actually did study mathematics prior to doing art. And she was very gifted in her intellectual abilities, especially in math. And these spirals, I think, are also just a good nod to that. Geometric shapes are something that you'd find in math. There's a different sequence. Basically, spirals can be made with mathematical equations. So it is very mathematical. I think she also really liked the idea of grids. So as you see here, we've made grids, 6 squares, in a very organized way, and that can cause a lot of calm in people. Grids and geometric shapes, those can bring about some sort of calm emotion. So I think that's another reason why she made these spirals and put them in the grid shape. I think it's meant to bring us some calm when she was, her emotions were so turbulent in her life, so it's kind of cool. So although Louise was quite unhappy for a lot of her life, she talked about art as making something that was nasty or bad, or turning hate into love. That art was the way that she could take those things and turn them into something beautiful and loving. And I think the spiral was also kind of that. It was a way of taking things that were out of control and putting it into something that had some control. Like her emotions were out of control, being able to put them in control, but still having the freedom of going as long as you wanted. And not feeling contained. So that's why we're working on these spirals today. Now, after you've printed maybe 4 or 6 per page, what you can do if you want is you can get some paint and trace the spiral. You could do this with a marker too, but I think the wet paint might ruin the marker. So if it's dry, I would go over it with marker, but I have some paint on my brush and I'm just on some of these gonna trace, not all of them, but some of these just trace that spiral. Maybe I'll extend it even further than some of the others, give it even more loops. So here's our different spirals on that sheet, and then on this sheet I'll do the same. once you have 2 pieces of paper that you're happy with, we'll just set them aside to dry. Make sure you put your initials on them so we know who made them. And I think then we'll just make sure we unplug our hot glue guns and we'll clean off our paintbrushes. We can go ahead and toss the spirals that we made if we're done with them. But traditional block printing works exactly like this. So there would be a block of wood typically, and carved out of it would be the spiral. Paint would be applied or ink, and then pressed down multiple times. So we have done exactly the same process as Louise, just with some maybe unconventional materials, so not exactly the same. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being on here with me today. Thanks for making art with me today and learning a little bit about Louise Bourgeois. I'll see you guys next week, and yeah, have a good weekend.